There's something unsettling about train rides late at night. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels against the tracks echoes in the stillness, a metallic heartbeat pulsing through the dark. The train was mostly empty, save for a few scattered passengers who, like me, seemed to have their reasons for traveling at such an hour. My reason was simple enough: a cheap fare and a late shift that stretched longer than usual. But that night I would come to wish I'd waited for the morning train. I'd chosen a seat near the back of the carriage, thinking it would afford me some peace and quiet. The dim lighting cast long shadows across the floor, and the hum of the fluorescent bulbs overhead was the only sound aside from the train's steady movement. Across the aisle, a woman in her 40s sat nodding off, her head bobbing forward before jerking upright again. 2 rows ahead, a man with a newspaper held it so high it obscured his face, the rustle of the pages marking the only sign of life. The first hour passed uneventfully, and I let myself relax, sinking into the worn seat. My headphones were in, though no music played. It was more to discourage anyone from striking up a conversation. Not that anyone seemed interested. We were all content to remain strangers, each lost in our own worlds. But then, somewhere between the small deserted stations of Harrowby and Greaves Crossing, the atmosphere changed. I can't explain it. A shift in the air, maybe, or the sudden awareness of being watched. I glanced around, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. The nodding woman was now fully asleep, her head resting against the window. The man with the newspaper had folded it neatly and was staring straight ahead. No one was looking at me. Still, the feeling persisted, a prickle at the back of my neck that refused to be ignored. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat and looked out the window. The countryside rolled by in a blur of darkness, the occasional flicker of a distant farmhouse light breaking the monotony. The train's reflection in the window shimmered faintly, and for a moment, I thought I saw something move behind me in the glass. I whipped around, but the aisle was empty, just shadows and rows of seats. I shook my head, feeling foolish. It was late, I was tired, and my imagination was clearly running away with me. Still, I couldn't shake the unease, the sense that something was off. The train began to slow as we approached Greaves Crossing, the brakes screeching in protest. The station, if you could call it that, was little more than a platform and a single lamppost, casting a sickly yellow glow. No one got on or off. As we pulled away, I noticed a figure standing at the far end of the platform, just beyond the light's reach. They were tall and motionless, their features obscured by shadow. A shiver ran down my spine, and I looked away, telling myself it was just some local waiting for the next train. When I looked back, the figure was gone. The next station was still a good 30 minutes away, and the train settled back into its rhythm. I tried to focus on my phone, scrolling aimlessly through social media, but the sense of unease had only grown stronger. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there, but the carriage remained empty, save for the sleeping woman and the man with the newspaper. Then, the lights flickered. It was brief, just a quick dimming before they returned to full brightness. No one else seemed to react. The woman continued to sleep and the man didn't so much as twitch. But I felt my heart rate spike, my palms growing damp against the cool metal of the armrest. Just a power surge, I muttered under my breath, though the words did little to comfort me. The lights flickered again, this time longer. The shadows in the carriage seemed to stretch and twist, and for a split second, I thought I saw movement at the far end of the aisle. My breath caught in my throat, and I forced myself to look. Nothing. Just empty seats and shadows playing tricks on my tired eyes. The train's movement felt slower now, as though it were straining against some invisible force. The usual rhythmic clatter of the wheels had taken on an uneven, almost halting pattern. And then, over the sound of the train, I heard it. A faint tapping, like fingernails drumming against glass. I froze, every muscle in my body tense. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, and I realized with a jolt that it was coming from the window beside me. Slowly, I turned my head. There was nothing there, just my own pale reflection staring back at me, wide-eyed and terrified. The tapping stopped as abruptly as it had started, leaving only the sound of my own ragged breathing. I glanced around the carriage again, desperate for some sign that I wasn't losing my mind, and that's when I saw him. A man stood at the far end of the aisle, half hidden in shadow. He was tall and thin, his posture unnaturally rigid. His face was obscured by the brim of a hat, but I could feel his eyes on me, piercing and unrelenting. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, watching. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. The sleeping woman didn't stir, and the man with the newspaper didn't react. It was as though they couldn't see him, couldn't hear me. The man tilted his head slightly, as if considering me. Then, without a sound, he began to walk toward me. His footsteps were silent, his movements eerily smooth. I gripped the armrest, my nails digging into the fabric as he drew closer. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. He stopped a few rows away, just close enough that I could make out the sharp angles of his face. His eyes were dark, empty voids that seemed to swallow the dim light. A thin, unsettling smile spread across his lips, and he raised a hand, beckoning me. I shook my head, pressing myself as far back into the seat as I could. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. He didn't answer. Instead, he took another step closer, his outstretched hand reaching for me. Panic surged through me, and I bolted from my seat, stumbling into the aisle. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ran toward the next carriage, the door sliding open with a hiss as I approached. The lights in this carriage were brighter, the air less oppressive. But when I turned to close the door behind me, the man was gone. I collapsed into an empty seat, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. The other passengers in this carriage glanced at me briefly, before returning to their own business, unconcerned. I wanted to scream, to tell them what I'd seen, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I sat there trembling until the train finally pulled into the next station. I didn't wait to see if the man would follow. As soon as the doors opened, I bolted onto the platform, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. I didn't look back at the train, didn't care where it went or who was on it. All I knew was that I needed to get away. To this day, I don't know who or what I saw on that train. But sometimes late at night when the house is quiet and the shadows grow long, I hear it again. The faint tapping against the glass, persistent and unrelenting.